Good afternoon, everyone. I am very delighted to be here. My name is Bassam Haddad, and I'm joined by the remarkable Sherene Seikaly, who is a scholar of many things, including Palestine and Palestinians and political economy. And she's also a very dear friend for many, many, shall I say, years and decades. We are going to address the topic Palestine and Palestinians as part of the series on Teaching Palestine Today. And we will start in just a moment. But first, Shireen, Kifik, how are you?
I'm hanging in. How are you?
I'm hanging in as well. Or as a friend of ours actually once told me during the genocide, when I asked him, how are you? He said, whatever. So, you know, this it's actually Darren Lee. So he said that, and it's kind of like something that I sometimes go by, but I have to give credit. At this point, I would like to share a few words about Shireen. I'm sorry, Shireen. I know that a lot of people don't like to hear their bio. It's going to be a short version. For those who would like to be updated on what you have been doing, Sherene Seikaly is Associate Professor of History at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She is the author of Men of Capital, Scarcity and Economy in Mandate Palestine out of Stanford Press, 2016. Her forthcoming book, From Baltimore to Beirut, or I should say her forthcoming book, comma, From Baltimore to Beirut on the question of Palestine, tells a global history of capital, slavery, and dispossession. She is the editor of Journal of Palestine Studies, director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at UCSB, and co-editor of Jadaliyya. Shireen, we have been holding these sessions whereby we feature the responses of several researchers, scholars, authors on a number of topics. One of the topics that we will be addressing today is Palestine and Palestinians, and the series that in which these scholars that we will actually watch the videos for in just a moment are part of the series. What have we learned in the past year about the genocide in Gaza, Israel genocide? Now, we did this last year, assuming that we are on the verge of, I don't know what to call it, of having this genocide subside. It hasn't. It's still ongoing. That's 24 months on today or now. And we would like you to start before we watch the videos, if you would, by just addressing any opening remarks, especially that it's been a year that we have since we've recorded these videos, which we will watch together, and I'm assuming you've already looked at them. Any comments you'd like to open with?
I guess I'll just say that the way I've been thinking about this in the last week or so is that Palestine is both shrinking and everywhere. And I think when we look at the Gaza Strip now, in this moment of pause, although that looks to be very much at stake today, is that on the ground, Israel is controlling over 80% of the Gaza Strip, a land that has been salted and partitioned into forced evacuation and military zones. The provisional map to which we have access to from the quote unquote Trump plan shows three phases of Israeli withdrawal. And in the third and final phase, should we live to see that third and final phase come to fruition, Israel will retreat to a so called security buffer zone that includes 58% of the Gaza Strip. Just last month, I think we were subject to Bezalel Smotrich uh, announcing the formal annexation of 82% of the West Bank. And he offered a now century old formula: maximum land with minimum population. And in this vision, six enclaves are allocated to the Palestinians. All are detached from one another: Hebron, Ramallah, Jericho, Nablus, Tulkarem, and Jenin. Um, And I think, one of the most painful things that we have to keep repeating as we face this new set of negotiations, a mechanism Israel has wielded as an alibi for mass murder, is the recitation of official numbers of the dead that we keep repeating, those numbers that are rendered acceptable by prestigious methods of obfuscation. And even as we rehearse these numbers, we know they are a drastic undercounting. We know that we may never be able to count the people who are, until today, still perishing under rubble. And we know that the minimum plausible number of deaths attributable to the genocide is more than 460,000 people. And in this 77-year-old imperative to control the territory of Palestine, Israel has been killing Palestinian people at different speeds and temporalities. And I think the newest, one of the things that's been very striking to me in this latest set of negotiations around quote unquote peace is this recursive historical continuity where Palestinians are once again present absent, right? As the very Palestinian theoretical notion, al-hadir al-ghayib, the present absent at those tables where our future is decided. And it's as if no time has passed since the turn of the century. And it's been since that time that Palestinians have been sort of subject to the waiting room of history, told that they were not yet ready for freedom, not yet worthy of self-determination. And in fact, it has been since 1917 that Palestinians have been confined to this temporality of deferral. At the same time, I think the response to this genocide and the criminalization of the opposition to it shows us how Palestine is also everywhere, from Ireland to the Netherlands, from Britain to Brazil, from Spain to the United States, from Germany to Italy, to the dock workers of Genoa, from the global Samud flotillas to our own campuses. People have demanded an end to this genocide and called for a free Palestine. They see in Palestine a reflection of their own struggles against greed and repression. And in that sense, Palestine is also everywhere.
Thanks, Shireen. There's a lot to talk about, but I would like to postpone that to after we watch the videos and have everyone else also join us in doing so. The people that we will be hearing from just a few minutes each are Mouin Rabbani, Buttu, Ussama Makdisi, Noura Erakat, Lana Tatour, and yourself, Shireen. Give us, I guess it would be about 25 to 30 minutes or so, and then we will resume after watching, and I'll be asking you about your comments on what transpired, and we will also address by the end of the conversation the pedagogic question. How do you actually approach or teaching Palestine and Palestinians in the classroom? So let's get to the videos.
What we've learned, Bassam, is that Palestinians are united and yet fragmented. United in that we all fear this same beast called Zionism. United in that we're all facing this same beast called Zionism. But fragmented in so many ways. For example, and because I frequently go to the West Bank and because I live in 48, I can see these different segments of society. And we've seen that, for example, in the West Bank, that depending on the city, some cities have, yes, they've been affected economically, but for the most part, life continues as normal, even though Israel's perpetrating genocide 100 kilometers away. I'm talking specifically about Ramallah. We've also seen that in other cities that there still is resistance that's alive and that is well. And that this resistance is continuing despite the efforts of the Palestinian Authority, not because of it. And then we see inside 48 a completely different reality. People who, on the one hand, were silenced at the early days, but still haven't gone past that silencing. Yes, they've been gone after. Yes, we've seen people like the Israelis go after Jalal Abu Amni, Nader Shalhoub Kevorkian, Mesa Abdel Hadi. These are well-known figures, academics, a singer, and an actress, as well as lawyers and others. But for the most part, it's been we just don't see these massive protests. Yes, they're illegal. Yeah, I mean, I want to be clear in saying it's illegal. And at the same time, it's as though there's nothing that can be done. And I do think that there is a lot that can be done. The fact that we're seeing just this sheer silencing has been mind blowing. I never thought that we would be in this place. The other part of it is that for me, I've seen that these policies of fragmentation that Israel imposed have worked. And what do I mean by that? Most people I know don't know anybody. Most people who are like under the age of 30, let's say, don't know anybody who is from Gaza. And the reason they don't know anybody from Gaza is because of Oslo and because the politics of separation. Most people I know who are under the age of 30 don't know anybody who are living in the West Bank, don't know anybody from Dakhel, from inside, and vice versa. And again, it's these policies of separation. And these policies of separation have made it so that what's happening, yes, it impacts us emotionally, even psychologically, but it seems to be as though it's somehow on the other end of the earth. Tying back to the first topic of Israel, what we have seen is that Israel is not stopping just at Gaza, that the targets are all Palestinians, and that the targets are not just all Palestinians, but it's Palestinian cities and towns, with this idea that that there are going to be good Palestinians and bad Palestinians. The model of the bad Palestinian is Gaza. The model of the good Palestinian is Ramallah. And slowly but surely, we're seeing Israeli policies that are favoring the quote unquote good Palestinians, i.e. Ramallah, and sending a signal to others, in particular, Jenin, Tulkarem, Tubas, and other places, that you have a choice. You can either be like the good Palestinians, i.e. Ramallah, or you can be like the bad Palestinians. And you know what I'm saying, bad, I'm putting in air quotes, meaning Gaza, and we will deal with you as though you are the bad Palestinians. These are policies that have been in the making for quite some time. And I feel like a year into this genocide, we're seeing all of this really taking shape now.
Well, I think the main thing that we've learned about the Palestinians is that it's now indisputably clear who is the victimizer and who is the victim in this relationship. It was not the Palestinians who went to Poland and Lithuania to establish a state of their own and expel the native population. It was the Zionist movement that came to Palestine with an explicit agenda, not of seeking refuge in Palestine, but of transforming the country into an exclusivist and supremacist Jewish state. So once again, the problem is not the Jewish presence in the Holy Land. It's always been there. The problem is not even high levels of Jewish immigration to Palestine. The problem here is a colonial agenda of transforming an overwhelmingly Arab territory into an exclusivist and supremacist Jewish state, which required the removal of the Arab population. And that is exactly what we saw in 1948. And subsequently, particularly after 1967, the expansion of that state, again with this exclusivist and supremacist agenda in pursuit of what it calls living space, Lebensraum. And what we've now seen in the past year in the Gaza Strip is that absolutely no resistance of any kind will be tolerated. When you have overwhelmingly peaceful resistance, as you had, for example, in the 1970s in the West Bank, or in the occupied territories during the First Intifada, there is massive and extraordinarily brutal violence and repression visited upon the Palestinians. And when you have active armed resistance to Israel, as you saw, for example, with the PLO in Lebanon in the 1970s, or emanating from the Gaza Strip last year, the response has been a campaign of genocidal violence. And in this latter case, the thorough and systematic destruction of the Gaza Strip to make it uninhabitable, unfit for human habitation. So, Israel and its sponsors have been extraordinarily effective in portraying the Palestinians as the aggressors in this relationship, as terrorists and jihadis and all the rest of it. But I think the past year, for those who were previously unfamiliar or insufficiently familiar with reality, has made indisputably clear that this is not a conflict, if I can just call it a conflict for the sake of argument. It is not one that was initiated by the Palestinians. In other words, we didn't go to their countries to take over their lands and expel them from their homes. They came to ours, and that is the root of everything that we've been experiencing. And the other observation I would make is, despite the extraordinary century-long campaign of violence and dispossession visited upon Palestinians by first the Zionist movement, then the State of Israel, again, with the full backing of Israel, something Israel could not have done without its sponsorship by first Great Britain and then France and then the United States. Despite all of that, and despite what Palestinians rightfully see as the betrayal of Arab states, Arab governments, and so on, we've also learned that this is a people that will never surrender, that will never cry uncle, that will not disappear, and that will remain and that will continue to struggle for its inalienable rights until they are recognized and implemented.
For full disclosure, I do hold an Israeli citizenship, so I come from that community and my family is there. And one of the things that I, kept reflecting and thinking about and keep thinking about the last year is, how do you live your daily lives with, your daily lives in every way with people who are supporting the genocide against your people who will likely commit also ethnic cleansing and genocide against you if they get the opportunity. And this is something, that I kept thinking about, of how do you walk? So my parents live in Yafa. My sister live in Haifa. My, more extended family live in Nasre and Reni, in the Jalil. And I kept thinking of, how do you go to work and you work with people who are supporting the genocide? How do you go and you, get services, walk down the street, see the signs that say, let the IDF win, or finish them all. Go to the supermarket and buy branded eggs that say, let the IDF win. How do you live day-to-day life in a genocidal society, in a society that went, and I'm not saying it lightly, I'm saying it as someone who follows news in Hebrew, who follows Telegram groups in Hebrew, who follows Facebook groups in Hebrew. Society that has gone genocidal, society that has gone truly to the dark side. And you know, I was listening to previous episodes, and I was listening to Sherene, and she was, you know, one of the topics was Israel. And Sherene Seikaly said that one of the things that we've learned in the last year, that we overestimated and we underestimated Israeli power. And I think there is nothing scariest and more dangerous than having Israel being overconfident and underconfident about its power. And I think this, for 48 Palestinians, this has been significant because 48 Palestinians really live like other Palestinians. They live the trauma of the Nakba. And Gaza is, you know, we see the Nakba ongoing. And 48 Palestinians may be more protected than other Palestinians at this particular moment because of their citizenship, because they enjoy more freedom of movement than other Palestinians. They have, you know, other types of rights that Palestinians may not have, while at the same time being systematically discriminated against and, you know, oppressed and so on and so forth. But they know that their citizenship offers very limited protection. The you know, the core of the Zionist project of the Israeli state is seeking to expel and eliminate Palestinians. And that includes, you know, Palestinians who are citizens. So this citizenship offers protection, but this protection is limited. And we always live in the recognition that if Israel gets the opportunity to enact an ethnic cleansing, to expel, it would do so. And Israel has been legislating a series of laws that, you know, that gradually allow for denaturalization. And it's not shy about this. So I think 48 Palestinians are really living this moment as a moment of fear, as a moment, you know, they're devastated like any other Palestinian, and others in solidarity of Palestine have seen the Nakba, the ongoing Nakba and genocide in Gaza. And they're facing immense political repression, which means that also they have very limited space to express you know, their devastation in terms of political protest. And we saw, you know, suppression of political protest. We saw the arrest of Palestinians for Facebook posts. We saw the arrest of Nadira Shalhoub-Kevorkian, Professor Shalhoub-Kevorkian, over her work on Palestine. And there is a really kind of this existential moment of fear among Palestinians, and knowing that they may be next. And maybe I want to just quote, and I'll finish with that, from Abid Abu Shhadi, who's an activist from Yafa, who writes in the, and I'm quoting, "In the annihilation of Gaza, we see a vision of our future as Palestinians inside Israel. We can't help but wonder, what will they do to us? Maybe they'll put us in the ghetto like they did after 1948. On TikTok, we see our Jewish Israeli neighbors destroying Gaza, abusing and humiliating Palestinians, expressions of unrestrained evil that are not even met with a whisper of protest from Israeli society. As dystopian as it sounds, these images are our future captured on film." And I think this is where, to understand, you know, 48 Palestinians now is really this quote. It is our future captured on film.
I'm going to change it a little bit to reframe it to say what Palestinians have taught us. And I think one of I have five lessons. One is the way that in the face of all this death, Palestinians have shown us real lessons on life, on how to cherish it, even in the midst of this relentless horror and these sort of very small acts of intimacy and love and care that we've all seen. We're not just seeing the genocide live streamed, we're also seeing all of the multiple ways that Palestinians care for each other in the midst of all of this horror. Second, I think that Palestinians have and continue to invite us to imagine freedom, and imagine it sort of against and beyond the framework of national territorial sovereignty. I think that when you see people in this kind of context, in this, sustaining essentially a force of annihilation, it's a real invitation to think about, well, what do we imagine freedom to be? Third, I think, and this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, which is, what does the experience of being colonized and dispossessed and subject to genocide, what does that experience do to your own experience of time? Because you live in a time that is elongated, at the same time that it's paralyzed. It's sort of a time that's always deferred. And I think, one of the things that Palestinians have taught us for a long time, but continue to teach us in these periods in this last now well over a year of genocide, is how do we plan not for the future, but despite it. And this is something that I think is important for all of us to think about, in terms of how do we even think about salvation, be it secular or messianic. And I think, and this is something that, Indigenous studies teaches us too, which is that we live in the dystopia that our ancestors imagined. And so I think Palestinians teach us that we are actually in the apocalypse, that we don't need to wait for it, and that we have to find ways to plan, again, not for, but despite the future. Fourth, I think Palestinians have and continue to craft telling stories. And this is a tradition of storytelling that Palestinians have been doing historically, not as a way of reflecting history, but as a way of shaping it. And here, Hannah Sleiman, I've been quoting her since the beginning of this genocide, where she sort of has taught me to think about storytelling as a historiographic craft, as a method. And of course, so many of us have thought really deeply about the lessons of Rosemary Sayegh, who always reminds us that telling our stories is a way to live despite catastrophe, to perceive the world and act towards it. And I want to also really follow here Lana Tatour, who has implored us recently to, quote, "Greet the Palestinians of Gaza, mourn with them, help carry some of their burdens, demand accountability for every loss, pick up the shards of memory and history that remain, and regather an archive of the disappeared. The only way to lose Gaza is to stop listening to the Palestinians of Gaza." End of quote. It's a quote from Lana Tatour. I think most of all that Palestinians teach us that even amidst this living in and among ruins, and we know that this rubble in Gaza, it's been estimated it will take 15 years to clear the rubble. And I think, there have been many theorists and scholars who have invited us to think of life among the ruins. And here Palestinians are living among the ruins, and even in that, they are demanding that we perceive our abundance of movements, our abundance of ideas and practices. They demand of us that we do not give in to the logic of lack, of unlivability, or even to the language of dehumanization. We cannot give in to that language, because I think we have to keep very closely the lessons that Palestinians in the Gaza Strip teach us about imagining life, about birthing it, about sheltering it, even in this new stage of the Nakba. And I think, watching Palestinians in the Gaza Strip wrest life from death, hope from despair, and cohesion from fragments really demands of us to understand and reside and accompany these people, particularly in their grief, and to understand that this grief is a portal through time and place. And here I'll just end with a directive brought to us by Musab Abu Toha, who translates his friend Akram Surani, who says to us, quote, "Leave the door to the tent ajar and put a dish of lentil soup on the floor. The kids could wake up from their graves hungry at any time."
So what we've learned about Palestine, first of all, thank you, Bassam, but what we've learned about Palestine in the past several months with the genocide in Gaza is its centrality to questions of human rights, to questions of international law, to questions of morality, to questions of decency, to questions of making sense of the world and our place in the world. And the reality is that we're in the 21st century. We're recording in 2024. The genocide has been going on since 2023. And Palestine is the one issue that I'm aware of where almost everything that we teach and everything that we learn about human rights, about past injustices, about notions of good and evil, right and wrong. Palestine is the one issue where there is still, until this very moment, people who support the genocide, people who, of course, are enacting the genocide, people who support and enable the genocide. And there are so-called two sides to this issue. On no other issue that I'm aware of today in any respectable university or school are there teachers or professors who take the side of the racists of the 19th century, the slaveholders, the oppressors, the genociders in the past. But on Palestine, it's the one issue that's a real issue, that is a living issue. And so in the sense, we can understand virtually all history, modern history, and 19th century history and 18th century history through the lens of Palestine, because we can see how it is that people in the past were able to say and do absolutely appalling things that we could not imagine. And yet here we are, right before our eyes. We've had the obliteration of tens of thousands of people, of every university in Gaza, of every school in Gaza. And people are either okay with it or support it. And of course, there are many people who are completely opposed to it. Many ethical people of all faiths, including many Jews, including many Christians, including many Muslims, who are completely appalled by what is happening in Gaza. And so Palestine gives us, in a sense, a key to making sense of not just the present, but also the past. It really gives us a window into worlds that we would not otherwise be able to make sense of. And so in that sense, it gives us a window both into the imperatives of justice, but also to how people can justify the most obscene cruelties right before our eyes and do nothing about it. And so it gives us a sense that there's nothing to be taken for granted, that we should never take for granted justice or equality or dignity or life, because all these things can be taken away and can be rationalized and taken away before our eyes. And so Palestine is a living issue that brings alive history, and that's what I work on, history.
I think the way that I would summarize what we've learned about Palestinians is their invisibility, the duality of their invisibility and their power that's happening simultaneously. So on the one hand, we see Palestinians being completely invisibilized and dehumanized by world superpowers who are not recognizing Palestinians as made of flesh, not recognizing that they have a life of dignity and a normal life to return to, not recognizing that mothers grieve, that fathers grieve, that there is love for one another. There has been such a thorough dehumanization of Palestinians in order to again prime audiences to accept their deaths. And this is the work that racism is doing. It's enabling people to expect Palestinians to die so that they can be left to die, right? And at the same time that racism is functioning in this way. And we see that racism, I think, really explicitly after April 2024, when where there was outrage over the killing of Israeli targeting of civilians, but it was the targeting of 7 World Food Cafe humanitarian aid workers. It wasn't, by that time, there were 35,000 Palestinians who had been killed, and they hadn't generated the same type of mobilization from media, for example, as these 7 World Food Cafe World Food Kitchen had mobilized in that moment. It's when we see, for example, the Wall Street Journal for the first time say explicitly, Israel is nowhere near a strategic victory. It has not, retrieved its hostages, and it's nowhere closer to decimating Hamas as it's saying, because they were the killing of these civilians, the targeting of them, created an existential crisis again. That the deaths of Palestinians, that the destruction of their universities, that the destruction of their hospitals, that the targeting of their journalists, that the sounds of children crying, that the sound of 6-year-old Hind Rajab telling the world that she's scared, will somebody come to help her, had not generated. And so here we are experiencing the thorough dehumanization. And at the same time, we're also seeing the incredible power of Palestinians, the incredible power to literally change the world, to illuminate, as we, started at the top, they illuminate the colonial nature of the world. They make clear, they have created a fracture between the global north and the global south. They have literally, in the words of Yazan Zaza, who pointed out that it was Palestinians who made it evident that Biden couldn't run a second term. And yet Palestinians are not thanked for any of this, because in the psyche, they just don't exist. They only emerge as threats, but never as agents, never as humans. And so again, we're seeing the power of Palestinians, an extraordinary power that we've seen in citizen journalists like Bassam Haddad and Hind Khudari. Power that we continue to see, even recently when we saw 6 Palestinian prisoners use spoons to dig themselves out of one of the highest security prisons in the world. It's the power of individuals like Dr. Amira Suli. If you remember, she was the doctor who flung off a cape and ran across in front of the hospital where there was sniper fire in order to retrieve the body of a patient and bring him back in order to be healed. We see the power of doctors who are functioning in horrific conditions where there's no aid left. We see the power of teachers who are creating makeshift schools. We see this resilience, this power to do with Rafif Ziadeh has pointed out to us in teaching all of us life. And that is, I think, where the international community, in the form of the millions and millions of civil society who have also taken tremendous risks, have drawn their inspiration from this well of power, of what is possible. We live in a world that was constructed, which means that we can construct another world. And Palestinians have been a guiding light about what it will take, the resilience, the power, the faith, conviction and love of one another in order to usher that other world that we deserve.
All right. Wow. So we have watched these commentaries on the question of Palestine and Palestinians, and I would like to, give you the floor to address what we've heard and, complement, supplement, and comment on whatever you'd like to address.
Sure. So thank you. It's always so, powerful to revisit how we were all thinking a year ago, how much has changed and how much remains the same. I'll say that, it was really moving to listen to all of our friends and comrades. I think Diana Buttu really put her finger on the most pressing questions, and when she talked about the ways that Palestinians are united in facing Zionism and fragmented across Palestinian borders, and she spoke really powerfully about the Israeli targeting of Palestinian cities, and she talked about this construct of the good Palestinian versus the bad Palestinian, and you came in later to talk about Mamdani as the good Muslim, the bad Muslim. I guess my fear is now, as we're watching the escalating terror in settler state terror in the West Bank, I think we might be at a place where we are even moving beyond the possibility of a good Palestinian. And this, we saw this too with the way that in the so-called Trump, proposal, the very possibility of the Palestinian Authority having any rule it is contingent on their quote unquote reform. So even the Palestinian Authority has been marginalized into a corner in which they are basically unable to speak. They were banned from going to the General Assembly in New York. And, Diana herself has, in the last couple of weeks, talked about the ways that this Trump proposal is essentially an Israeli proposal, named as the Trump proposal. I was really moved with Lena's reminder that she was sort of thinking through what it meant to be, and Diana was talking about this too, and Diana was also talking about the intergenerational burdens that we carry, and what do we pass on to the generations to come in this moment? What does it mean for Palestinians living inside Israel to live among people who support genocide? And I think Lena pointed out, that the scariest thing is Israel's overconfidence and underconfidence in its power. And, at the core of the project, she reminded us, is this imperative of maximum land, minimum people. And this is in part why I started with that framing. And I was really moved by the words that she quoted of Abd Abu Shahade from Yafa, who said, in the annihilation of Gaza, we see a vision of our future. And he meant our future inside Israel. But I think for many of us, and I've been saying this for a long time, Palestine is a paradigm. It isn't just about the location that it's in. Its consequences are global, and its lessons should be we ignore those lessons at our own collective peril. Mouin, very powerfully talked about the way that the binary of perpetrator and victim has become very clear the way that any kind of Palestinian resistance has been criminalized and posed as uncivilized. And he ended on a more optimistic note, or at least I think what I think is an accurate description, which is that despite a century of dispossession at the hands of the British, the Zionists, and the Israelis, and despite the betrayal of the Arab states, I think a betrayal that we see now deeper than we've ever seen before, the Palestinians have continued to struggle for their inalienable rights. Noura spoke again very powerfully about the duality of Palestinian invisibility and power, and how the way that Palestinians are constantly erased both on the ground and discursively annihilated, at the same time that the insistence on life from doctors, nurses, teachers, first responders, people who are trying to save other people while they themselves are governed by hunger, has an incredible power that reveals and illuminates the world, its limits, and its possibilities. I think Ussama also, spoke poignantly about the centrality of Palestine to break down the ideas of both sidisms, but also the centrality of Palestine to think about human rights, to think about ethics, morality, and the ways in which the last 2 years have really shed a light on the precarity of notions like dignity, life, and equality. I think in my bit, I think what I still hold on to is that the biggest threat to the regimes who attempt to silence us is to tell our stories. And I think this is what I would really insist on in the classroom, especially in the United States, where people are so afraid at this moment, is that we must continue to tell our stories, no matter how much those stories are criminalized, because that is really one of the most powerful and important things that we do.
I want to take this to one particular corner, and that is, do you think that this genocide could have continued or taken place without the dehumanization of Palestinians, however you want or people might, describe or articulate, the word dehumanization? And I am not here referring to the actual killers that have killed tens of thousands of people and destroyed an entire, set of cities and towns. But neither am I referring to the states like the United States and the UK and Germany, France, others that supported, with the with the US leading the charge. I'm referring to the bystander, and not even the bystander that supports what Israel's doing, but the others, right, that are not, explicitly supportive. How do you think the word or the meaning of the word dehumanization or dehumanizing Palestinians, how does it operate in the minds of a large number of people? And we live here in the United States, and I have to, be referencing the US in the first degree because I'm aware of what I'm saying in terms of how a lot of people might, especially of late, see that this is a problem. But could have this happened and happened for so long, even for these folks who are not explicitly, supportive of the genocide and still cheering it on? Could it have happened without some level of dehumanization of Palestinians?
So, I mean, as you know, Bassam, I really struggle with this paradigm of humanizing and dehumanizing. I try to reject it because I think its logic is I think when we fall into the logic of, oh, let's humanize the Palestinian, then we're falling into a logic where we have to evidence that we are human. And I think that so I want to talk about that, and then I want to talk about, well, what could have changed, what how did this happen. So a few things there. I think that what we ought to do when we look at these questions is reject the way that people are excluded from the category of the human. And I think if we think about this action of, the people who are doing violence, whether it's violence, corporal violence, or discursive violence, then we are actually saying, we're putting the verb and the act in with those people, right? Like the U.S. media has been really complicit in excluding the Palestinian from the category of the human. The discursive realms in which we all exist are the institutes, the courts, all of so forth, have been complicit in that exclusion. I think when we rephrase it that way, two things happen. We're actually saying who is doing the excluding rather than putting the burden on the subject that is dehumanized. And on another level, we are making links with other struggles. So I think that this is really important. Black feminists have taught us for a long time, people like Hortense Spillers and Sylvia Winter, that one of the ways that violence is made possible and annihilation and genocide is made possible is by excluding particular people from the category of the human. This is not new or specific to the Palestinian case. And I think learning from that is really important. And here, I think in particular, I think a lot with, Samira Smith's book, Juridical Humanity, in which she really kind of rejects this formula that that the colonizer can either give us or take away our humanity. So I think that rejecting that logic in terms of how we're thinking about it is really, really important. Your second question, which is different, is, well, how did this happen? So many people are watching the genocide being live streamed. It's not a question of people not knowing. It's not a question of the truth hidden underneath the rubble, even though we are subject to those obfuscations and the mockery of reporting on this in many venues in the United States and throughout Western Europe. I think, I've been studying lately in the last few days, sort of, not, reading the people who are actually doing this scholarship, and in particular, people like Dana in Merup and others, about just how profitable this genocide has been. I think it's been incredibly profitable for cyber surveillance, for drones, for military armament, for AI technology. This is the first AI assisted genocide in history. And when you actually look at the tremendous profits that Israel and Israel's military industry, as well as its tech and cyber industries, have wielded in the last 2 years, it really tells the story, I think. And those profits are not just about Israel and the United States. They also implicate many other countries in the world, and among them, perhaps most importantly, are countries like the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, right? The kinds of ways that, and Dana says this really powerfully, that the Abraham Accords did not initiate these ties. They just normalize them, right? And so I think that when we look at the scene in front of us, we see global outrage. Perhaps not enough, but it is a kind of momentum that we've never seen before. The kinds of people taking to the streets in cities all over the world has been unprecedented. And we see, on the other hand, corporations and states making intense profits out of genocide. And I think this really hones the reality that we're facing, which is that what is happening to Palestinians in Gaza should be a lesson for us all, that it is a fulcrum, a site of really understanding the struggles that we face in the days, months, and years to come.
I really appreciate this, and I would love to speak more about the actual, terminology and some of the things you shared, and some of the things that Samara, who's a common friend, has shared, and we actually spoke about this. So, if we would like to use other terminology to explain the indifference, right? Even if the indifference actually has reached a point where people, for one reason or another, especially after March 2000, at least based on the polls and statistics, after March 2025 has sort of subsided, and we saw like a more active rejection of what's happening, even by former Israeli supporters, or even, what can be called, Zionists or liberal Zionists, which is another, topic altogether. How would you then, what would be, how would we address this indifference? And I would like to make a distinction here, because a lot of the politics that I've read, a lot of literature that I've read about dehumanization, is also about the refusal of the subjugated peoples to give the permission to the subjugator or to the oppressor to actually humanize or dehumanize from the perspective of those who are being dehumanized or killed or, ethnically cleansed, but from the perspective of the perpetrator and the onlooker. What is it that sustains this indifference, despite the fact that you're watching people being killed? And if we offset that against somebody who quote unquote looks like them or like you, that has been killed, just one individual or a group in Europe, France, Canada, and all of a sudden there's this, outrage. So how would we approach that? So this is separate from whether we are giving permission for people to humanize or dehumanize. How do we deal with this sort of concept or attitude then? What's a productive way?
I think it's racism. I think that the kind of dynamic ways that racist logics and civilizational logics, the way that different perpetrators have deployed them over time, that's how I think about it. I think about all of the ways that states, political parties, various ideologies have employed civilizational and racist logics to attempt to exclude people from the human. And I also think, that we should be looking at the ways that, looking at the necropolitical regimes that we live under, and the ways that all of us are precarious when we are facing regimes that are at base necropolitical. And we are in I believe we're very much in a hyper necropolitical era where not just excluding people from the human, but annihilating people has become a profitable thing to do, right? And I think a lot about the erosion of the social contract globally as also a particular kind of logic that is putting people at risk without that don't necessarily need to be in those kinds of risks, right? So I'm thinking about healthcare in this country, or I'm thinking about climate catastrophe, for example, and all of the kind of environmental guardrails that are falling to the wayside under the Trump administration. So again, the situation in Palestine is really, it's a catastrophic moment in which we are facing the total annihilation of Palestine. And I think there is, I don't believe in comparative frameworks, right? I think that I think we can think across time and space about places, but I think that what's happening in Palestine now is very specific. And I think the tools that we use to analyze it are through racism, civilizational logics, and the things that we've witnessed all along. And I think the I think we each have our own role to play in attempting to dismantle these logics, right? And I think that I think one of the really important roles is to really highlight Palestinian life and Palestinian history and Palestinian experience, not as a mode of evidencing our humanity, but as a way of inviting people to understand the rich set of experiences and practices and lessons that Palestinians have to offer.
Yes, absolutely. And despite the the question of nomenclature or conceptualization or terminology, what we're observing, especially living in the West, in the United States, also is all the more flagrant given the discourse, the liberal discourse about respect and humanity and human rights and so on and so forth, which brings this to the fore. According to many who have written about this and discussed it, and as we all also converse about these matters, including what Talal Asad said about liberalism and categorization, how once you categorize as human or third human or what have you, you can proceed as such and it becomes accepted. And this is something that we've seen across centuries of slavery and what have you. So this is sort of a segue into my last sort of sphere of this conversation, which is about pedagogy, teaching Palestine and Palestinians. And instead of asking you to sort of formulate how you actually teach Palestine and Palestinians, because this forum is not really capable of handling that sort of breadth. We have limited time, and I think people also, after 2 years of killing and conversing and talking and reading and podcasting and news and doom scrolling, everyone is exhausted. So that's why we're wrapping this up, within a reasonable time. So given how people are scared to even mention the word Palestine or Palestinians in the classroom, and of course, if you ask people in public, it depends, but people, may give you various answers. But the reality, which I have observed as a result of doing this for the past 2 years on a weekly basis, is that people have actually changed the way they talk about Palestine because of the risks involved in addressing Palestine and, God forbid, the word genocide and what have you. How would you approach this in the classroom?
Thank you. I would say first that I think it's important to recognize the broader the broader realities of fear that people in the United States are living right now, and that Palestine is a bellwether for that on our university campuses. So if you're going to be silent about Palestine, there's so much more that you're going to be silent about. It's coming. That silencing is here. It's at the door. And the sooner you succumb to things that you think are further away from you, the harder it is going to be to talk about the things that you're a quote unquote expert in. So our silence is what regimes who criminalize critical thought and speech actually want. And we know that the very institutions of higher education are under direct targeting by the current administration, by the Trump administration. We know that we've weathered in these institutions decades of attenuation at the hands of the politics of austerity. And we know that we are even further weakened in this moment when any critical thought is going to be criminalized. And either we stand up and speak to the things that we know are the basic principles that we have to stand for. Either we work together to give students the critical tools that they need to survive and defend themselves in this kind of future that they're facing, or we become, frankly, part of the problem. And I think the practical tools that I would say is do your homework, come prepared. If you're going to talk about Palestine, call your friends who study Palestine. Use the Palestine in Context resources. Go to the Institute for Palestine Studies, right? Really put together whatever you are going to present in a way that is empirically grounded, and rigorous, and double and triple fact checked, and go in prepared, right? I mean, I think that for many of us who are, have been in academia and are women, are from the global South, are people of color, are indigenous people, we have for a long time known the lesson that we have to be 10 times more prepared than anybody else when we go in. And that's how we all have to be right now. We have to be 10 times more prepared. We have to proceed as if every word that we say is being recorded, and that we can stand by those words no matter what. And we have to continue speaking and being vigilant. And, thanks to all of the labor that you've done, Bassam, in bringing and curating so many people, we have these resources gathered. You are not alone. There are so many people here to support you, to speak out. Don't be afraid, because you are on the right side of history.
Thanks, Sherene. This is a very important topic for everyone and for myself, and I appreciate your comments about being prepared. And the interesting. I mean, I honestly, those who know my even on my my public profile, which is, this is all public. You and I are speaking. I haven't changed what I said after the genocide, because what I said before the genocide, was defensible, and what I'm saying after the genocide is defensible. So it's not like I now have to be, it's not like I used to say unacceptable things and now I feel that I can't say them. But, a lot of people who are asked by students about this topic the educators are hesitant. And let me tell you what I do, and you can tell me what you think. Basically, I share that completely discounting the topic is definitely not the way to go. There are ways to talk about Palestine, even if you are new to the topic. After you have gotten prepared, like you shared, there are things that one can do that are people are looking for safety, and there are things to do to be safe. And then, of course, beyond being safe, but there are things to do in terms of the lowest bar that you can do and still be safe. And even then, of course, you could be picked out. For instance, if you comment on what the ICJ shared, which is a plausible genocide, people are even afraid to share that because it has the word genocide, even if it's prefaced by plausible. What would you recommend by way of what to avoid or what to stress?
Well, I mean, I've said this in the in the in the lecture that I did. Actually, it was a lecture that you and I did together, and you broadcasted. It was a lecture on what happened in 1948. And I go through sort of my five basic principles, which I think are a good grounding for how to, get at this history and the five basic principles that I use before I start any class on Palestine and Israel or on 1948 or 1967. I'm actually in a few hours going to give a lecture, and I'm going to start with this, which is number one, to reject racism in all its forms. And this includes anti-Semitism, anti-Palestinian racism, Islamophobia, Orientalism, anti-Blackness. That we really have to center rejecting racism as we read, think, and learn together. The second is to decenter conflict, because that really can't capture the experiences, narratives, and expressions of Palestinians and Israelis over the last 100 years. Number three is to de-exceptionalize Palestine.
Sorry to interject. You said decenter conflict because focusing exclusively on conflict is not going to capture the broader context. Okay.
Yeah. A second is to put Palestine as part of the histories of the Middle East, the Arab world, the Jewish people, race, colonialism, third worldism, the struggle for decolonization, the rise and fall of U.S. hegemony. This place can teach us about the promises and limits of the Enlightenment, the exclusionary power of European nationalism, how European anti-Semitism actually gave birth to the political movement of Zionism. It can teach us about how Palestine and Israel kind of embody the history of the nation state as it brings together the kind of two different victims of European political modernity, the internal victims of state building and the external victims of imperial expansion. And I think the fourth principle is to really think about what would it mean to engage radical empathy. And what I mean by that is to think about the history of the genocide of the Jewish people, or the Shoah, which means catastrophe in Hebrew, and the history of the ongoing Nakba of the Palestinians since 1948, and which the last 2 years of genocide are part of. And Nakba also means catastrophe. To think of these histories as not oppositional and also not comparable, right? They're not oppositional. We have to look at them together, but they're not comparable. They're totally different, right? They're not, comparing them is ahistorical, and we don't need to do that. But what they teach us is how thinking about them together allows us to think about the centrality of catastrophe in both Jewish and Palestinian histories. And I think this last point gets us to the final principle for me, which is that language itself is a product of history. So I said Jewish in the last sentence, not Israeli. And I think here we have to really dig deeper into how the terms that we use are objects themselves we have to dismantle. So here there's 2 points, 2 subpoints. One is this both sidisms, right? This two sides narrative, which sort of equates the Israeli state with the Palestinian people. And that equation elides the power differential between a state and an occupied people, who are now subject to genocide. On the other level, I think that the pairings that appear synonymous or antonymous are ones we have to pay critical attention to. So Jewish and Zionists are not synonymous. Judaism is the world's first monotheistic religion. It's 4,000 years old. Zionism is a political nationalist movement that began in the late 19th century. Not all Jewish people are Zionists. Not all Zionists are Jewish. Another pairing, Arab and Jewish. Those aren't opposites. The majority of Jewish people lived under Arab or Muslim rule until the 12th century, when many began migrating to Europe. And it was until the 1950s that substantial numbers of Arab Jews lived throughout the Middle East and North Africa, from Morocco to Iraq and Iran. And Zionism and Arab nationalism really made that category of the Arab Jew impossible. So here I think the seeming opposition between Arab and Jewish, people have to understand, didn't cause the conditions of Zionist Palestinian struggle, but rather it was the Zionist movement that produced that opposition. So I think those are, just some basic principles that I've used for a long time. They might feel at this point, not enough or difficult, but I guess I would just say, I think we have to go in, whatever we teach, into the classroom now. Whatever we teach, we have to go in really rigorously, having done all of our homework. And I think we have to reach out to people and get their advice, and care for one another, and do our homework. But you were saying, oh, well, some people can be safe in this way and some people can be safe in that other way. And I think it might not be safety that we are prioritizing as we prepare. I think it might be being principled, being prepared, and being thorough. I think those are the things that we can prioritize. Safety is a really contingent and abstract term. What does it mean to be safe? We're not sure. Our universities are under pretty severe attack right now. Our language programs, our positions, our graduate programs, across the board. So what does safety mean in that regard? Maybe it means to continue being principled and doing our jobs the best way we know how.
Thank you, Sherene. The 5 points were very, very productive, and I'm glad I insisted to hear more from you. And I know you were being a little bit modest, in the sense that you didn't want to be didactic or anything, but really, those 5 points are important because they start with the historical background, not just for the moment, not just in this moment, and then of course they can carry through. And with respect to safety, I mean, of course, I hear you, but principled people are asking this question. Like principled people that I look up to are telling me, can I say the word genocide, or can I even say the word slaughter, and or crimes against humanity? And it's it's one thing to be principled and prepared. It's another. I think that's also a function of what's missing from this conversation, right? It's also a function of whether you're prepared to take risks, not whether you're prepared or principled, but whether you're prepared to say it and come what may, because whether you're prepared to act on your principledness. And it's maybe because I'm connecting with educators sort of on purpose for the past couple of years, like almost on a daily basis, asking the same questions like everyone else here. I'm just a bit sensitive to those concerns, even today, when the majority of Americans have actually, have a particular view of Israel that they didn't have in the past. Even today, it's still causing anxiety. But I think those starting points that you shared are very important. If you don't mind, I can put them on the screen as well, if that's okay.
Yeah. I have like a whole. You can link it to the lecture that we gave. So I just want to say three things. One is, you say even today, okay? But I guess what I would really insist on is that today, the situation for academics in the United States is pretty besieged. So it's not even today, right? The Palestine is a bellwether. If you were scared to talk about Palestine in October 2023, and you've been scared to talk about Palestine in October 24, and you're still too scared to talk about Palestine in October 25, you should be noticing that there are many other things that you're not going to be able to be talking about. Look at the way that the Brown agreement with the Trump administration linked trans rights and Palestine, criminalized trans people. Look at the ways that the kinds of ways that what has been called anticipatory obedience has, that these institutions have cleansed their documents and their applications of diversity, equity, inclusion. Now is a bad word, right? So it's not even now, it's especially now, and the difficulties are yet to come. That's what I'm trying to say. And the way to deal with those difficulties is not to be silent and cower and sit in the corner. At the same time, it's not also to speak without being prepared. Do your homework, learn the history, get the training, and thankfully, ASI and so many other institutions has been putting all of this together so that you can comfortably talk about the historical. If you start the story in 2023, it's not okay. That is ahistorical. You have to start the story much earlier, and you have to be able to engage what are the historical origins of this story. And you have to also, I know a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I think it's important that we, that we actually go back to the late 19th century and we understand the what did Ottoman Palestine look like? What did Mandate Palestine look like? What kinds of social movements? What kinds of land tenures? What types of gender relations? What kinds of class formations are taking place? At the same time that we look at the Jewish question in Europe and how it gave birth to multiple responses to European anti-Semitism, how Zionism was just one of those responses. So, I'm biased, but I think history is a really important way to get people to understand the situation that we're in. And also, one of my mentors always said, bore people with the details. And I think it's a good lesson, right? Be detailed, be thorough, give people all the details, right? And I think the historical, as boring as it might be for so many people, is the place that we must all start to get to the conditions that we're in today.
Thank you, Sherene. I really stretched this as much as I could by pushing some buttons and getting from you a lot of the things that I know will be extremely productive. I may be a little bit more hopeful than you about this moment compared to the past. Not just because the public opinion is shifting, but also because there's a lot on the plate of the oppressors, and things are hopefully things are a little different. Although, watch me get arrested or fired soon for saying all these things. I thank you profusely.
Well, just to say, I'm not like, oh, I'm going to get arrested, or you know what I mean. Like, I'm not. I'm just. I think it's just part of what it's meant to be Palestinian for me, which is meant to be constantly vigilant. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Sorry to interrupt you.
Absolutely. No, interrupt as much as you want. And yalla, طيب, let's move on. Let's keep doing this. And, courage. And shukran. Thank you so much, Sherene. I really appreciate the time. And I'm sorry that we went longer than I promised.
Oh, hopefully this won't mean I'll be desperately unprepared for the lecture.
No, you'll be fine. Just bore them with the details.
Yeah, bye.
Bye, Habibti. Salam.